Hello, future educators. I'm Dr. Ayana Campoli, and I'm thrilled to be doing this, our first lecture together as a class. Um, Today, we're talking about the early history of education in the U.S. So, slide two. Okay, so a logical starting point for talking about the history of the education in the U.S. is to start about the beginning of the U.S., the colonies. So we can think of the colonies in three groups: New England, which was, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, um, and then the middle colonies like New York and Pennsylvania, and then finally the southern colonies like Georgia and South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. Okay, so let's start with New England. In New England, you have to think about the Congregationalists or Calvinists when you're thinking about education. Um, there was an act. It was called the Old Deluder Satan Act. And it read, "It being one chief object of that old deluder Satan to keep men from the knowledge of the scriptures, every township of 50 householders shall appoint one to teach all children, and any town of 100 families shall set up a grammar school." So there's this idea, this Congregationalist or Calvinist idea that man is naturally evil and depraved, and that reading scripture is his chance at salvation. And so everyone is responsible for their own salvation. And so as communities, let's make schools. Okay, and one of the primers or those early textbooks, it said, "In Adam's fall we sinned all, thy life to mend, this book attend. The idle fool is whipped at school." Ugh. Okay, so we see um, this focus in New England. Let's see what it was like further south. In the middle colonies, there was a lot of religious diversity, right? So New England was pretty homogenous. In middle colonies, a lot of religious diversity. There were Quakers, there were Catholics, there were Mennonites, there were Lutherans, Moravians, and so on. Okay, and there's this idea of inner light. But also of religious tolerance because you have a lot more religions reflected. And so basically, in the middle colonies, each religious sect had its own denominational schools. There wasn't a an act or it wasn't written into the law of the land, but each religious sect made its own denominational school. Now, the southern colonies most closely resembled England or the English homeland. And I don't know if there are any Downton Abbey fans out there. Yes, yes. Okay. Um, so this idea of it being there's an aristocracy, right? Lords and ladies and dukes and duchesses and that kind of thing. And they're ruling over land, right? A certain amount of land. And so in the southern colonies, they tried to replicate this English lifestyle and institutions. There were no school systems. The wealthy aristocratic children were taught with private tutors or governesses, or and when they got older, they were sent abroad to boarding schools. Now, um, low income white children received no education under this system. Only the wealthy owners, the plantation owners, and their families received education. Um, and as you can guess, enslaved Africans were not given any education. In fact, it was against the law for enslaved Africans to learn to read or write. Okay, we'll be exploring that more a little bit later. Okay, so the revolution changes everything. This is slide 6. We're the revolution was against England, right? So we're breaking away from England. We're um, we're moving our focus away from that whole way of thinking, right? We're focused on building a new nation. Books begin to focus on American ideas. They focus on heroes of the revolution. Noah Webster of Webster's dictionaries um, said the first word that a child should learn is George Washington. Okay, this real focus on our new nation. So, how was education to take place in this new republic? A national education system, and this idea of from the rubbish a few gems. So, um, okay, I don't think we should refer to children as rubbish, but this idea that we're going to figure out who the leaders are going to be through this education system. Um, Monroe says that a said that a society that wishes to govern itself must have an educated populace, and that that needs an N in there. Okay, now there's this idea of national interest but local control. It's a national priority but local control. So the 10th Amendment says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved for the states respectively. And so, because public education is not mentioned as one of the federal powers, it has historically been delegated to local and state governments. So, you can think of um, states being mainly responsible for the education within their borders. The common school movement. Now, so we had these different models of education. Whether it was there was a law in New England schools that was based on these religious principles. There were each denomination was setting up its own schools. In the middle colonies and in the southern colonies, um, basically homeschooled, right? We have tutors and governesses for the wealthy young children. Okay, so except in New England, most schooling was private, whether it was through a church school or through private tutors and or boarding school in Europe, that kind of thing. Middle, that's what the wealthy kids experience. Middle class kids were taught by their parents or at a church school, and the poor um, were not educated. This and Andrew Jackson is created with this idea of the common man, right? In the 1828 election, it was seen as the ascendancy of the common man. So we're moving away from this kind of selected aristocratic group as being who should be the leaders, and the idea this idea that the common man can play a leadership role. Man, okay, we got to talk about that too, how gender plays into education. Okay, so there's a push for educational opportunity in the form of a common school, a school that's common to both rich and poor white children. Horace Mann was the first, I'm looking at slide 9. Horace Mann was the first Secretary of Education of Massachusetts, right? So, um, and he's credited with being thought of as the father of the common school, or what we now call the public school. He was an advocate for common schools. He felt that common schools should not teach controversial issues, but issues that brought society together. And really, what they're trying to bring together are the rich and the poor. Okay, that's where the main division was. Okay, between wealthy whites and low income white people. This did not include girls, people of color, many poor whites, okay? But um, this idea that we want to bring the classes together was part of the impetus for the common school or public schools. So that's how slide 10. So that's how public schools in the US were born. In Massachusetts, we say we're going to have these common schools, common for everyone. And therefore Horace Mann is the father of public schools. Now, currently in kindergarten through 12th grade in the US, in public schools, there are about 50.5 million kids. In private schools, there are about 5.2 million kids. So almost 91% of children in the US attend public schools, and only about 9% attend private schools. But so this common school idea, this public school idea, was very important for our country, and continues to be, which is why I'm so excited that you all are future educators. Okay, you have a great day.